All right. We are live.
We are live. And Chris, talk about a crazy Black Monday here on January 8th. It is about 4:30, a little bit after 4:30 on the East Coast. And we have had a ton of moves, very active over there near Giant Stadium, near MetLife Stadium. I'm sorry, I don't want to disparage our Jet fan friends, but a bevy of moves here. First and foremost, and it's where we're going to start, is defensive coordinator Wink Martindale stepped down after Brian Dable said today that, yeah, he's expecting him to be back. But, a couple hours after that, we heard that Drew Wilkins, outside linebacker coach, and his brother Kevin Wilkins, a defensive assistant, were both fired. Both of those guys are Wink Martindale individuals. About an hour later, we heard that Wink Martindale stepped down. We also had Thomas McGaughey, the special teams coordinator, fired. Offensive line coach Bobby Johnson fired. Running back coach, which we already knew this, Jeff Nixon, also left to accept the Syracuse offensive coordinator job. And Craig Fitzgerald, the strength and conditioning coach, went to Gainesville to be a Florida Gator chomp chomp. So this is a lot of moves. Brian Dable has a lot of vacancies he has to fill now. So there's going to be a lot of conversations coming in the coming weeks, Chris, about what the hell are the Giants going to do? And what does this say about Brian Dable and the staff that he's assembled, and just, is he disagreeable? There's just a lot of questions. What are your thoughts, bro?
Man, this has been a way busier Monday than I was expecting last night. Yeah, I was expecting some moves. Thomas McGaughey being fired is not unexpected, just given the way the Giants special teams have performed
Bad.
over the last 2 years. But they had kind of stepped up a little bit. We hadn't had quite as many of the just cringe, oh no, what happened moments. In the second half of the season, maybe the arrival of Gunnar Olszewski, you had the injuries to the kicker. Yeah, maybe McGaughey would survive. Bobby Johnson getting fired, that wasn't a surprise. The offensive line has been bad. It needs to be better, and we actually need to see some development from the young guys. The Wink situation, we knew that there were difficulties, that there were frictions and conflicts going on behind the scenes between Brian Daboll and Wink. We know these are two alphas. These are two guys with very strong personalities. And when you don't get the wins, it's very tough to smooth over those rough patches. And again, I'm not surprised by this happening. We had gotten the report from Jake Laser earlier in the year that, it was unlikely that the relationship would survive the year. But then the Giants defense turned it around. They turned it on, and they still gave up yards. They still gave up points, but they were playing hard. They were the reason a lot of the time the Giants had hope of winning, that they had hope of even potentially, maybe somehow sneaking into the playoffs. And I start to wonder if, maybe those differences could get patched up. And then we saw the report with the outside linebackers coaches, and it was like, okay, yeah, the Wink guys are gone. I think this relationship's going to come to a close, and so it does. Yeah, you kind of have to go, okay, what now? Because the Giants have quite a few holes to fill. Yeah, special teams coordinator, that is not a small job, even though it gets overlooked quite a bit. We've seen game-changing plays get made, or game-changing mistakes get made on special teams. The thing I always go back to is the year the then San Diego Chargers had the number one offense and number one defense in the NFL, and they missed the playoffs because of a putrid special teams. But more important, I think, offensive line and defensive coordinator. Who are the Giants going to get? Is Brian Dable going to go for guys with whom he is already familiar? Could we see Patrick Graham come back to New York? He was Dabbs' first choice for DC, but he went out to Las Vegas. That's still a little bit weird for me. And speaking of the Raiders, what about AP? Yeah, he's in the running for head coach there, but maybe if Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan, goes to the Raiders, gets JJ McCarthy like he supposedly wants, maybe Antonio Pierce could come home. Lots of moving parts. It's there's just so much to digest right now. It's kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. And I'm looking at Patrick Graham. I think that's a name that we can certainly consider, but you got to look at this too from a macro point of view, man. Like the New York Giants personnel is tailored towards a defense that isn't necessarily common around the NFL. So I think some of the guys that they have, they're interchangeable. I don't believe that they're going to have too much of an issue switching to a more even front team, but it is going to change roles. And if you do look at Wink Martindale's defense, Dexter Lawrence, and I think a lot of this can be attributed to Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach, who is still on staff right now, but his usage at the center spot, which is an odd front defensive look, which not every NFL team runs, it's been astronomically better than when he was in Patrick Graham's defense, right? Even though it was different, and he was a little bit younger and there was different personnel then. But the Wink Martindale, man, with Bobby Okereke, with Micah McFadden's ascension, with Xavier McKinney, who's a free agent, we don't know what he's going to be doing, but there's a lot of guys on this team though that I'm like, what does it say about them? Are the Giants going to be off to a slow start 6 weeks into the season next year because they have to learn a new defense? What does this say about Brian Dable? Because is he this difficult to work with? Is he this disagreeable? Because that's the rumor right now that Brian Dable might be a little bit disagreeable. We know Wink Martindale's kind of a cool, calm, collected type of individual. Brian Dable much more high strung, as he jokes about quite often. So I wonder what that says about him and his ability to retain a staff, because this was handled kind of awkwardly.
It definitely was. Yeah, it was pretty obvious that Dable did not want to fire Wink Martindale, but it also kind of seemed like he made it difficult for him to stick around. Yeah, you do kind of have to wonder a little bit if maybe some guys might be looking at this and go, yeah, do we really want to go there? We'll see. I think the questions regarding the Giants defensive roster, like you said, that Wink's scheme, that high pressure, heavy reliance on exotic blitz looks, that is very manpower and personnel intensive. You need the right guys to run that defense well. And the right guys for that defense are not necessarily the right guys for a more common NFL defense. Part of the reason why that defense is capable of being as disruptive as it is because it's so much different from what the rest of the NFL runs. That Vic Fangio defense that has more or less taken over the NFL. So that is going to be very interesting because, like you said, what do we do, or what do they do? Not us. We're not our checkbook. We're not going to be in these negotiations. What do the Giants do with Xavier McKinney? What do they do with Isaiah Simmons? I would love to see both of those guys back because they are very talented players. But the Giants are going to have to get the defensive coordinator position figured out before they can even begin to address that. And then you've got other guys like Micah McFadden, who stepped up considerably this past year. Dane Belton. Both of those guys, part of the reason why they were drafted was their blitzing acumen. Yeah. Would they have as much value to a defense that isn't blitzing 3/4 of the plays?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And that doesn't even start to address the special teams. I'm hoping to go back to the defensive coach, I'm hoping whoever the Giants do retain or bring in, Chris, I should say, they end up retaining Andre Patterson. They end up retaining Jerome Henderson, who has withstood 2 coaching staffs now, and who, to me, I don't sit here and study through every single positional coach in the NFL, Chris, but those 2 have done a wonderful job with the New York Giants and their specific personnel. So I hope they are both retained. It's going to be interesting. Special teams coordinator. I saw a good old Wes Steinberg, the man Wes Steinberg, a quote unquote reporter, say that they're entertaining Joe Judge, right? which is always a fun troll. I don't know if everyone knows who Wes Steinberg is, but he's a hilarious troll, whatever the hell you want to call him on the Twitter machine. And I'm sure a lot of people did fall for that, but yeah, man. Then you have running back coach, strength and conditioning coach, all of these coaches that you're going to need to find a new faces for. How will it gel? How long will it take to gel? Regarding the defense, man, it's just It sucks. I mean, again, I don't want to act as if Wink Martindale had a top 5 defense. He didn't, right? Like
No.
that wasn't the defense. I think the poor play this season from Wink Martindale's defensive unit, a lot of that should be attributed to the offense, which was very bad through stretches of the game
Yes.
where the defense had to play like, 70, 75 snaps or what have you, and the offense put the defense into a really precarious type of situation. We saw the defensive numbers spike like crazy. In turnovers, I think they were first in turnovers. They were tied with the Baltimore Ravens with 31 turnovers this year, which is crazy to think about because last year they only had 6 interceptions total.
Yeah, that shows what that scheme was capable of being. But you're right. The offense does bear blame, at least partial blame, for the defense being, bottom 5, bottom 6, something like that in yards and points given up, just because the Giants defense, or I'm sorry, the Giants offense never put any pressure, or very rarely put any kind of pressure on opposing teams. And that makes it hard for an aggressive defense to play when the opposing offense can just run the ball, when they don't have to deviate from their game plan at all, when they don't have to throw to catch up or keep up with your offense. Like we saw the Dallas Cowboys, who have one of the best defenses in the NFL, really struggle when their offense wasn't producing, like in that game against the 49ers. Their defense just got run off the field, but their defense is built to play with a lead. And I think to a certain and maybe even large extent, so is the Giants, because if the opposing offense has to throw the ball, that opens up all those opportunities for those blitz packages, which we saw this year when the offense actually was putting up points and putting pressure on the opposing team.
What's going to happen though when the Philadelphia Eagles go to Wink Martindale next year and he ends up going to the Eagles with the horses they have to rush the passer? That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, very much so. There are going to be some very interesting, like you say, jobs available. The Eagles very well could be one. I mean, there's talk that all of a sudden Nick Sirianni could be on the hot seat if they get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. You've got Washington completely cleaning house, going to the NBA for basically the minds and experience in building winning teams. They could be a very dangerous team, especially with that second overall pick. So that there's going to be a ton of moving pieces and parts. And this day, I think, is going to have some pretty big repercussions around the league, not just because of Wink Martindale, just like because of the moves made all over. And we still don't know what's going on with Darth Hoodie. Maybe he could come home.
Yeah, right. Glass half full approach to this situation, right? Look, it doesn't look great that Brian Daboll may be a little bit disagreeable and might not be able to work with everybody, but that also could be an overreaction. But a glass half full look is this happened with the Ravens 2 years ago when Wink Martindale decided to part ways with the Baltimore Ravens, and they ended up getting Mike Macdonald, who has done a phenomenal job with John Harbaugh in the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the New York Giants, do they have the track record of John Harbaugh in the Baltimore Ravens?
No.
Absolutely not. No, they do not. No. But this is not a world-ending type of move. It's frustrating. I think a lot of people view Wink Martindale as a fall guy. I don't know if it's necessarily that. I can see why that's why people perceive that, right? I easily can see that. But Brian Daboll wanted Wink Martindale back. Wink Martindale resigned, and I think he's probably upset about it. He probably wanted to be fired so he could get paid out this contract. I'm not 100% certain what's going to happen now with Wink Martindale and his contract. I hope the guy gets his bag. I hope he gets that money. You know what I'm saying? But I look at Brian Daboll and I say, if he does add somebody who he can work better with, maybe that's going to alleviate some of the issues and the tensions in the locker room that were there throughout the 2023 season, because it just seemed obvious. Whether you want to blame Daboll, whether you want to blame Martindale, those two just weren't working well together. And this could be a blessing in disguise. That's the glass half full way to look at this. Glass half empty way to look at this, Chris, is Brian Daboll can't work with anybody. They're going to bring some schlub in who's his friend, and the defense is going to suck, and we're going to waste Kayvon Thibodeau, and Dexter Lawrence is never going to be the same, and all that kind of stuff. So you can look at it each way. Time will tell.
Yeah, that I think that both of those are potentially valid. I would like to go with the glass half full. I kind of keep coming back to Patrick Graham because I feel like he is kind of just kind of in limbo out there with the Raiders. I thought he might get a crack at the head coaching job, but that went to AP, and I feel like either Antonio Pierce or Jim Harbaugh are going to be the head coach out there with the Raiders. So where does that leave Patrick Graham? Could he come back to the Giants? Like, his defense wasn't bad. Like, it just wasn't. It had some of the same problems, particularly with the offensive side of the ball that the Giants had. And they were able to make that transition. It has at least some of the same traits as being like a multiple defense, not a strictly 3-4 or 4-3 defense. So maybe some of those same players, particularly in the front seven, could stick around if Graham, if Brian Daboll gets his first choice for DC again.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder who that would be. Leslie Frazier's a name that's getting thrown out there, but we'll have to wait and see. And then these other positional coaches, specifically on the defensive side, the defensive assistant, the outside linebacker coach, we're not going to know until the defensive coordinator is selected. And I have not personally looked into the special team coordinators and who's going to be around, who has links to Brian Daboll, but I'm sure somebody has dug into that. And that's something that we'll have to go over. I'm not going to sit here and act as if I'm some sort of savant on the special teams. We would need to bring in Joe DeLeon for that, who
I was going
loves
to say,
himself.
we'll have to turn on the Joe light.
Yeah, we'll have to turn on the Joe light. Exactly. And we'll do that when the Giants do decide to hire a special teams coordinator, if it is somebody coming from outside of the building. I want to talk before we get out of here, though, on the offensive line, because Bobby Johnson, he's been a hot name since, I don't even know, the beginning of the season. It's like, what is this guy doing here? Look, I don't pretend to fully understand what's going on inside of the offensive line room. I'm not there. I don't know how Bobby Johnson is teaching, exactly how he's teaching these players to play. What I do know is the Giants have selected several offensive linemen. None of them have developed as we would have hoped. They've all either stagnated. Some of them have dealt with injuries. Most of them have dealt with injuries, but I believe the issues persist beyond that. And the line, as Andrew Thomas even said today, he didn't necessarily say that it didn't have continuity, but he said in order to have a successful offensive line, you need continuity. And I don't believe the Giants' offensive line has had really any continuity. The most continuity they've had is in recent weeks with Justin Pugh and John Michael Schmitz coming along a little bit, but John Michael Schmitz didn't have a fantastic year either. So what are your thoughts on Bobby Johnson's firing? To me, it's something that I believe had to happen, not trying to cough the guy's job.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. The lack of development, particularly with Evan Neal, Josh Zudu, he's been dinged, he's been hurt. To a certain extent, so has Evan Neal. We forget he's had that sprained MCL, he's had a concussion. He's basically been playing on one leg all year, right up until finally found out he had that fracture in his ankle and was put on the injured reserve. So I do wonder how much that has impacted him, just the way he was able to move when he was on the field, and whether or not that impacted his development and practice during the week. But all in all, just like the fundamentals, the technique, when you see like even veterans failing to pick up stunts and twists, and those just killing the Giants' offensive line, that to me does speak to coaching issues. I think the Giants' offensive line issues are maybe a little bit more nuanced than just the offensive line coach, but I think the Giants do need to bring a new voice into the room, and somebody who has a track record of developing young linemen, because the Giants can't waste Andrew Thomas, and quite frankly, they can't afford to waste Evan Neal or Josh Azudu or John Michael Schmitz or even Marcus McKethan. Like, they've got young linemen who have talent. They need to get that out of them, because they have to get off that hamster wheel with the offensive line. They have to get something from those draft picks. And Yeah, like I said, I don't think the answer is just as simple as new offensive line coach. That's all it is, because have seen things over the course of the season that speak to more nuanced and varied issues with this offensive line than just the coaching. But better coaching matters. That's something we've been saying for years. Coaching matters.
Coaching certainly matters, and it's something that I hope Brian Dable is that guy. I think when he gets his quarterback, maybe we can start to see the New York Giants return to the respectable franchise that we hoped they were kind of working towards last year when they won a playoff game. And this year went about as bad as it could have went. It really did. And now we're time to turn the page towards the draft. And before the draft, we're going to be looking at Brian Dable, be like, who are you replacing Bobby Johnson with? Who are you finding to take the seat of Wink Martindale, your special teams coordinator, your outside linebackers coach? And what do those hires mean for all the young personnel that you have, whether that is the offensive lineman or the defense? So I'm looking forward to it, Chris, but you have anything else before we get out of here, bud?
Yeah, just actually talking about the draft, that I think we need to see who the new offensive line coach is, what perhaps that says about the Giants' blocking scheme going forward before we can even really zero in on any potential draft targets on the offensive line. Because, you do this just as much as I do. Not every offensive lineman is fit for every scheme. You could have an offensive lineman who is kind of only a man gap guy, or maybe a smaller athletic guy who is only a zone blocking guy. And we don't know who to concentrate on. The Giants scouts don't know who to concentrate on until they know what that blocking system is going to be. So the Giants are going to have to figure out their coaching staff, and they're going to have to figure it out pretty soon, because the Senior Bowl isn't that far away. The scouting combine isn't that far away after that. We're just starting the draft process, but it moves pretty damn quick.
It absolutely does. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Chris and Nick show on this little rapid reaction of the Giants' moves here on Black Monday. Please, if you guys like this content, head on over to bigblueview.com. Check out all of our written content going over some of these moves. I mean, once the Giants hire a defensive coordinator, I'm going to be diving deep into that film, man. I'm going to be looking forward to that for sure. So thank you, everyone. Take care of each other and have a lovely day.